Are you suggesting that some politicians are over-egging how many threats they're getting?
I can only speak from my experience, and my experience was that we had a lot of MPs who were being deceitful around crimes that had not happened.
What you've just said, effectively, every single MP is a
equal
target
risk?
because they are a representation of the state.
The watershed moments that have led to this rise in political violence are probably 9/11, probably Brexit. All of that has turned our country into a country that I think a lot of us would barely recognise in terms of the way we talk and debate.
Almost none of the people that have been attacked were ever directly threatened by the person that attacked them. So I would literally be receiving phone calls off certain MPs 20, 30, 40 times a day saying, am I safe to leave the building?
Is the current system for the security of MPs fit for purpose?
This is a global production.
The Crime Agents.
Welcome to The Crime Agents with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Basu.
In the last 10 years, 3 British politicians have been killed. 2 murdered and 1 allegedly murdered. Now let that just sink in. Is this a country that we live in now? This is something you normally associate with countries like Russia or parts of South America. But this seems to be what's happening in this country. Now listen, it's unfair to say that it is now normal for an MP to be murdered, but it's absolutely right to say that politicians receive more death threats and more abuse and more hostility than ever before. 96% of MPs say they've faced abuse, either online or in person. And a third of MPs said they've been threatened with violence, and a quarter of them have received death threats. Let's start by telling you the story of Jo Cox. She was the Labour MP for Batley and Spen. She was shot and stabbed in her constituency in June 2016. She was 41. Her killer was a far-right extremist. Rosie Cooper, the MP for West Lancashire, she was the target of a far-right plot to murder her in 2017. That was a counter-terrorism investigation, and that involved National Action, who are now banned. Sir David Amess was next, the Conservative MP for Southend West. He was stabbed to death at his weekly surgery in October 2021. He'd been an MP for nearly 40 years, and his killer was inspired by Islamic State. And last month, Ann Widdecombe was allegedly beaten to death with a hammer in her home in Devon. The former Tory minister and more recently a Reform UK spokesperson was 78, and police say she was deliberately targeted. Counter-terrorism police, they are leading that investigation, and a 28-year-old man has been charged with her murder. And it emerged last week that counter-terrorism police are now investigating any links between the Ann Widdecombe suspect and an incident that happened in Nigel Farage's home, where he says his home was firebombed, but the Met say it was an attempted burglary. Neil, when you listen to that, you've got to pose the question, is it now time for MPs to get way more security?
Well, I think that debate is probably ongoing with the Speaker of the House, the Parliamentary Security Authorities and the Metropolitan Police, who effectively, with parliamentary and diplomatic protection, protecting those 650 MPs behind the gates of the Houses of Parliament. They've still got to, at some point on a Thursday night, go back to their constituencies, hold their constituency surgeries all around the country. And on that occasion, they'll be effectively subject to whatever protection the chief constable of their area is going to give them, or their local commander is going to give them, through an operation called Operation Bridger, set up after Jo Cox's murder, along with a unit within parliamentary and diplomatic protection, which we're going to come up and talk about. And that was back in 2016, where, in fact, when Jo Cox was murdered, a group called National Action, who glorified in the Thomas Mayer, the neo-Nazi who had murdered her, glorified his act of violence. And immediately Amber Rudd, by December 2016, had proscribed that group as a terrorist group, which allowed us to then go about starting to, effectively investigate and dismantle National Action. Your introduction's interesting because we do normally associate political violence of this level, so murders, murder plots, murders of former MPs who are still got a high public profile, you do associate that with kind of Latin America, with organised crime, but perhaps also with the United States with its gun culture and the fact that its politicians are very outspoken. And I think if you look back in time and you look back over the last, I would say, 25 years, the watershed moments that have led to this rise in political violence are probably 9/11, probably Brexit, the referendum, and the sort of animosity that caused, the xenophobia it caused, but also the division in society it caused, even families battling each other.
Yeah, and Jo Cox was murdered during the Brexit campaign.
Well, I was going to get to that point. And the first election of Donald Trump and the kind of rise of Make America Great Again, and the kind of there was an awful lot of nationalistic fervour and kind of white supremacy sentiment raised by that, which was also a direct kind of a direct attack against Islamism. And we've talked many times about the growth of the English Defence League in contrast to the Al-Majroon, Anjem Choudhury's group. And all of that around the sort of rise of Islamist jihadist terrorism, which has always been our greatest threat. But alongside it, it was causing a reaction in white communities, and you were getting extreme right-wing terrorism at the other side of it. So all of that, and I'd say all of that has caused the rise in political violence, and it's been massively accelerated by social media use and the amount of stuff that is online, often anonymous, allowing it to be often fueled by hostile states. All of that has turned our country into a country that I think a lot of us would barely recognise in terms of the way we talk and debate, and never used to be like that. It used to be a bit of a Punch and Judy show on a Wednesday afternoon in Parliament.
Yeah, exactly.
Prime Minister's questions. And then all of a sudden it's become incredibly violent, incredibly hateful. And I feel incredibly sorry for members of Parliament and their staff who are having to wade through those inboxes of hatred.
I mean, just to give you an idea of the scale, Jess Phillips, the Labour MP, she's had more than 600 rape threats, and someone sent her a death threat from prison. David Lammy, he's spoken about receiving racist abuse and death threats all the time. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, he's someone who's had several death threats, and he now requires, the highest form of police protection. And Penny Mordaunt, the former Tory MP, have a listen to what she said has happened to her.
I've had more than 700 death threats and rape threats, including threats to murder my family as well. And in the last 4 years, I stopped being an MP 2024, but in the last 4 years, I haven't had a day when I haven't had a live police investigation or a live court case going on. And that, I'm afraid, is the norm now.
I guess one of the issues we have now, and you touched upon it there, is how can you separate the keyboard warriors compared to someone who might be actually willing to carry out a murderous act?
I mean, the reality is that the vast majority of people who are on a keyboard and sitting in their bedrooms, lonely, probably not all of them disturbed, some of them just wanting to vent their frustration. The anonymity of sitting in your own home behind a keyboard where you don't have to actually face anyone face to face, I think causes people to go to massive extremes when the language they use, the comments they use, the threats they would never do that face to face. It's highly unlikely that they would walk up to anybody and say those things.
I get threats all the time as well, especially on X. If I post a story or a clip goes out from either a live from LBC or the news agents or the crime agents, I regularly get abuse. So I've had quite a few death threats. Just in the past year. I kind of I just shrug them off. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know.
It's difficult because that has often been an argument, but policing has made at times when it was less sympathetic to this, probably back in the mid-teens, where people were saying, well, look, if you're in public life, it's just something that goes with public life, because it was so unusual for the keyboard warrior to become a real-life figure who was going to cause serious harm. I think Thomas Mayer put everyone on the back foot, and people suddenly started to realise if you are getting death threats, you have got to report them. We've got to look for patterns, and you've got to stop thinking, well, it's just part of public life, having to cope with that. I was a cop, you're an investigative journalist. We both face those kind of threats online. There's a reason why I haven't looked at social media in Well, since social media was invented.
I envy you, Neil.
Well, one of the things we say to people is, if you want to stay sane and you don't want to see this kind of stuff and you don't want it to affect your life, don't read it, switch off. But of course, if you're in public life or you're an investigative journalist, you have absolutely no choice because you are living part of your life.
Yeah.
You're either investigating, you're getting feedback, or you're communicating with your constituency and your public and your voters. So there's no way you can just simply switch off.
Neil, how does it work? I think a common misconception is that all MPs or quite a lot of MPs get police protection. They don't. That's just not the case. It's only if you're the Prime Minister or a high-level minister. How does it work? How do the police assess who to protect and who not to protect?
Well, you'd hope there would be a system, and there is. So there's a thing called a risk management board, and a risk management board looks at the vulnerability of a particular person. So are there any actual threats against them? Are the things that they do and the things that they say and the places they go putting them at risk? So you're looking at the overall vulnerability of a person, and then you're also looking at the impact if something that was going to happen to that person. And when we talk about impact, we talk about economic impact. You can imagine an assassination of a prime minister or a president will move the markets. It will cause economic damage to a country. That sounds very harsh, but that's one of the impacts you've got to take into account. The other is the psychological effect on the nation. Effectively, are we going to see people withdrawing from public life? Is it going to undermine democracy? Are people going to be too scared to leave their front door?
To be honest, you ask about people leaving public life. I wouldn't blame them if they do, right?
Well, if you think about it, political violence is designed to undermine democratic rights to vote. So if you've got no one to vote for because no one's willing to stand to do that job, you haven't had to gerrymander an election or put your own candidate forward. You've undermined democracy just by stopping people wanting to be Democrats. So that Risk and Management Board reports to another committee called the Royal and VIP Executive Committee, protects members of the royal family and certain ministers. And that's always been a relatively small cohort of people. We're not allowed to talk about how many, but it would be surprisingly small to most people because that threat and risk assessment, and most importantly, the impact of a person being assassinated only really applies to a very, very small group of people. And sometimes it can be an ordinary member of the public.
And one of the reasons it's such a small group is the fact that it's so expensive. Every close protection officer, it will cost the Met around, £100,000. That's just in wage, overtime, resources. And then that's without thinking about these expensive bulletproof cars that is required to transport these subjects or principals in. And also, because of the constant threat, the job has changed to match the threat. Home addresses are stripped from public records, panic alarms, surgeries by appointment only, police escorts, and a named police contact for every MP. And I think another factor in this is that every former Prime Minister gets full police protection from the Met. And back in the day, for life. And back in the day, there used to be 2, maybe 3 max. Now, due to the political turmoil we live in, there is 9 former prime ministers who now receive full protection. So we're talking about millions and millions of pounds, aren't we?
Yeah, well, we're not allowed to talk about the exact budget or the exact costs or the exact way people are protected because that's all methodology that's very useful to people who want to attack. But yes, it is extraordinarily expensive. It goes into the tens and tens of millions of pounds in the era that I was doing it. So when I retired in 2021, I can only imagine that was just before I stood down from this job, just before the murder of David Amess, and that will, like the murder of Jo Cox, caused a step change in parliamentary security. So will David Amess, and so now will Ann Widdecombe. So that figure, I would be surprised if it hasn't doubled. And what can't happen, because it takes so long and it's so expensive to train cops to do this, not least because they have a very high level of armed police training, as well as all kinds of other specialist and niche training about their advanced drivers, for instance, are trained in hostage taking and anti-hijack manoeuvres. I've been on that course. It's fantastic fun. But my God, I would never have passed that course. The driving standard's incredible. Yeah. So the number of people you put through these courses, the failure rate, and the length of time it would take you to train them is being far outstripped by the number of people who now need protection.
Let's now bring in Philip Grindell, the man who helped build the system designed to keep MPs safe and who now does the same thing in the private sector for some, shall we say, high-profile clients. Philip Grindell is a former Met detective who specialised in intelligence and counter-terrorism. After the murder of Jo Cox, he helped establish the Parliamentary Liaison and investigation team. He now runs Diffuse Global, a private security firm protecting high-profile individuals from targeted threats. Thanks for joining us, Philip. I understand you two know each other, and I have to say, I'm getting a bit sick of being outnumbered by two cops.
Well, it's because we owe him so many favours, he keeps calling them in, you see. So
And also, you shouldn't have decided to host a podcast called The Crime Agents.
Well, we should get two crime journalists in. You know?
Yeah, well, actually, we should.
Neil, take us back to 2016. Jo Cox has just been murdered. What was happening within Scotland Yard?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as panic, but I would describe it as incredibly tense. So you've got Sir Mark Rowley, now Sir Mark Rowley, who's Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, back then was Assistant Commissioner, Specialist Operations, the head of counter-terrorism. He gets summoned to what would have been a Cobra with probably a prime ministerial chaired Cobra. So he's coming back from that level of meeting saying, how do we protect, how am I going to protect parliamentarians? The person that he would have been briefing every week is the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary is responsible for domestic threat. Every single member of Parliament knows that the Home Secretary is their conduit to getting better police protection. That Home Secretary probably would have been completely deluged, it was Amber Rudd at the time, by requests from MPs saying, how can I be better protected? And so Mark strides back into New Scotland Yard, and I'm his deputy that runs parliamentary and diplomatic protection. And Mark, I'll summarise it, Basu, do something about that.
Right, okay.
And so I ring up Phil and say, Phil, come
do
and
something
work for
about
me and
that.
Do something about that.
That's how
that's how leadership works in the police.
Yeah, it is.
Phil, we've just been talking in part one about this being a completely unprecedented time. In the last 10 years, 3 murders of politicians or former politicians. How great and real is the threat for high-profile, not only politicians, but high-profile celebrities?
Well, I would start by saying that, clearly what's happened most recently is a reminder of how vulnerable some of them are. But I remember doing having a threat assessment done during the period when I went in, and it was incredibly toxic. So we're talking about the period Brexit had been called, I think, and we were leading up to Brexit and all that. So incredibly toxic. We increased reporting by 400% because they weren't talking to anyone. Well, all of a sudden we've got 400% increase of reported issues. Now, interestingly, when we went to the various agencies that do those threat assessments, it came back as low.
Really?
And I wouldn't necessarily say it's any different now.
So what's the criteria, as much as you can tell?
So what we have to understand is there is a difference between a threat and a risk.
Okay.
Right? So a threat is what is the intent and what is the capability of those people. So when we're looking at it at the kind of the global scale around the national threat assessment, we're looking at what are our adversaries trying to do to us, and who is intending to harm us, and then the capability, how do we mitigate their capabilities? And so really break that right down, we're looking at the same thing. And so what we have to be mindful of, I think, is that there are 650 MPs. And so since 2000, when the terrorism threat change really, I would argue, Neil's more of an expert on it, but I would argue from a kind of group terrorism of the IRA, etc., to the lone actor type attack that we've had since then, we've had about half a dozen MPs properly targeted and 2 or 3 of those murdered. But that's still a low number, tragic as it is. Now, the risk element is, what's the likelihood of this happening? Low, actually. But what's the impact? High.
Right.
So while you've got a low threat, you've got a sort of medium to high risk because, as Neil sort of alluded to, when one happens, the balloon goes up. So we have to be mindful that 650 MPs are going to work every day, and we can talk about their perception of the threat because it's quite different to what the reality is. But the reality is we have very, very few cases where an MP's life is in danger, and therefore the threat is not what they think it is.
How can you distinguish between the keyboard warriors
So I should probably go back to saying when I went into Parliament, I'd left school at 16 and hadn't done a great deal of qualifications, joined the army, joined the police, kind of traditional junior rank officer probably. And I started doing a master's degree before I was called in security management.
Right.
So I flipped my dissertation to look at this very subject. How do we decide who is in danger, in essence? Yeah. And what do we do about it? And within that research that I came across, there is a particular piece of research which the US Secret Service did in the 90s, where they effectively had two individuals, one of whom is a kind of mentor to me, who was a forensic psychologist. And they had full access to all the Secret Service files for the last 50 years of every assassination and attempted assassination. And they had full access to anybody who was in the custodial system to go and interview them around this subject. And they came up with some really interesting findings which demonstrated the commonalities that these people do, if you like, the behaviours that they do, which was the kind of early creation of behavioural threat assessment. But one of the really interesting bits was that almost none of the people that have been attacked were ever directly threatened by the person that attacked them.
Is that right? Wow.
And if you think about it logically, why would you tell someone you're going to come and attack them?
Yeah,
right.
I suppose.
So there's another research piece of work, which again is done by a mentor of mine, and so they did a similar piece of work, and they came up with this term, hunter and howler, of the two different people that you're looking at. The hunter is the guy that's going to kill you. The howler is the one that is making the threats, the troll, etc. And the background to that is there was a hunter in a state in the US who got caught with sufficient amounts of cannabis that would mean it was a federal offence.
Right.
So he was going to have a long sentence. And in his family, men didn't live that long. Right. So for him, he thought it was a death sentence. So he went in and killed people in the courtroom and then killed himself. So he became known as the hunter. Just out of nowhere comes out and attacks on a targeted attack. There was this other individual who sat in prison who was consistently writing offensive, abusive, threatening messages to judges and everyone else around the country. And when they went and spoke to him, they said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Well, I've got nothing else to do. And so I'm going to do this. I'm going to cause them fear." So we've got these two groups of people. We've got one group, the hunter, who we're looking for, who is the person that's going to carry out a targeted attack. Then we've got the howlers, which are the ones that predominantly we come across and which most public figures are referring to when they're saying, "I've had death threats" and all this sort of stuff. And so, I'm not saying that you would look at those and just dismiss them, because we didn't. We looked at those that were making all these threats, but you can pretty quickly eliminate them from someone who's going to be dangerous.
Right.
And presumably you can also intervene a lot earlier with harassment and
totally.
hate crime legislation and malicious communications and all of that kind of stuff. And you'll have had the same experience that my counter-terrorism teams did, was when you go through the door, you are finding some lonely person with nothing better to do sitting in their bedroom who's doing exactly that kind of work, never intending or even realising that what they're actually doing would ever be taken seriously, or somebody would be talking, they would never do it face to face.
No. And we found some common denominators. We found the drunks that would watch TV, watch Question Time, listen to a podcast or what have you.
I think you have to be drunk to watch Question Time.
Well,
sorry, Fiona.
Yeah. But they'd watch those sort of programmes, and you'd be shocked how many people we would turn up and they'd say, "God, I wasn't even aware I'd sent that message," or didn't even know I tweeted that. And we'd have to show them what they've done. So there's that group. There's the group that Neil referred to. But then there's this group also that are this insignificant man who targets women because he has an issue with powerful women. And the only way that he, in his misogynistic perspective, can feel better about himself is to try and put them down and cause them fear. So we were getting those, and they'd often be living, with their mum, with their wife, etc. But there was these three groups. What we didn't get was the extremists contacting them. And what's also interesting is, a lot of talk has been about how much of this is on social media. Actually, when I was in Parliament and we did the figures and what have you, less than 15% of all those threats, all those abuse was on social media.
So where's it coming from?
The vast majority was coming from letters, because you can write your MP free of charge. was coming in phone calls and was coming in people going to surgeries, etc., and sending messages there. But it wasn't social media. Very little of social media. But the problem I had was that when I tried to point this out to various people within Parliament, it wasn't the messaging they wanted to hear, because they were going after the social media companies for political reasons. And so we were targeting the 15% rather than the 85%, because there were things that we could have done, or Parliament could have done certainly, that would have stopped that. So in those times when I think it's changed now, but if you phoned up Parliament, you'd come across a switchboard. You could then ask for an MP or whoever, and they transfer the call. But because the minute they transferred the call, there was no way we could trace the call back. So we had a couple of people. We had one individual who we named the Colonel. We had probably 600-700 letters from him to various people. And we could never trace him through his DNA, fingerprints, anything. We had a box full of these letters that he used to send, abusing, targeting MPs. Now, what's really important to understand is, these have an impact. The level of fear and terror driven by what happened to Jo Cox, and also because a lot of the MPs didn't know what happened to Jo Cox, so they would make it up, if you like, in terms of their own minds. There was great fear. And what happens when you get inundated with these threats and this abuse is that you become paranoid, and then you become hypervigilant. So I would literally be receiving phone calls off certain MPs 20, 30, 40 times a day saying, am I safe to leave the building? Because they were so inundated with threats, which we knew were not real threats, but they felt they were.
Talk about how you manage that. So it's interesting. I was trying to find parliamentary and diplomatic protection people who feel incredibly proud of protecting the mother of all parliaments. Is sometimes quite difficult. The job is quite difficult. It's not a normal policing job.
Yeah.
But you would describe, you have got a community, whether you like it or not, just like any other neighbourhood officer or community officer. You have got a community, and they're pretty much captured for you 4 days a week behind that gate. They've got access to you, Phil, and they're calling you that often. How do you, the 16-year-old boy who joined the army and then joined the police, manage the relationship in the mother of all parliaments?
Well, what we did initially was, when we first went into Parliament, what we found was there was newspaper reports, media reports every day from an MP saying, I've had death threats, I've had this, that and the other. And we got into a process where every person that reported it, we would contact them directly. Right. And invariably they would say, I was misquoted.
Really?
Or that happened 2 years ago.
Blame the journalists.
And we began to learn that MPs require the oxygen of publicity.
Right.
Because the truth of the matter is there's 650 MPs. Most people couldn't name more than 20. The vast majority are anonymous.
Yeah.
And actually, when I went in and part of the job that Neil asked you to do around the national intelligence picture, we found that there were police forces around the country. They didn't even know who their local MPs were. So to answer the question, though, we would set up drop-in centres. We would set up meetings. We would try and engage as much as we could with MPs. We would find friendly MPs who were on board, who would then spread the message that we were trying to do that. I held a couple of meetings where I got Facebook and Twitter and others to come in, and we would brief particular groups of MPs. And we increased reporting, and by doing that, we increased engagement with them. We got to learn the system. So a lot of people, public figures, celebrities, etc. When people are engaging with them on social media, they don't seem to realise they're not actually talking to the person, to the celebrity or to the MP. They're talking to their staff.
Yes. And
so we engaged with the staff, because very often it was the staff that would receive those messages. The MP would never see them very often.
Would they be informed?
Well, again, one of the challenges we had was that we were trying to protect certain MPs because they were inundated, and the CPS was saying to us, you need to go and show this MP this message because I want a victim statement. And I was like, you don't need a victim statement because the offence is complete at the point of sending, and so you don't. And what we don't want is MPs appearing in court.
Should the CPS not know that?
Well, I ended up having a meeting with the DPP, Alison Saunders at the time, because one of the MPs knew her and said, I can get you a meeting. And I presented her with some of our case files where the responses to them was nonsense. And so we managed. She was very good, I have to say to her. So we created a system where we had direct access to senior Crown prosecutors so that they knew the system. They wouldn't ask us stupid questions and wouldn't ask us to victimise the MPs. We had access to very senior people in Facebook and Twitter, etc., so that we could go directly to them and say, this message has come out, can you take that down? Now, we didn't always get our way, but we certainly had fast-track access to it. And even if the answer was no, we would then have an ability to know why it's not. And sometimes, I can give you a particular example, Diane Abbott being threatened or what have you, and the term coconut coming up.
Right.
So that, to a black person in the UK, definitely, that's a racist term.
That's a criminal offence.
Right. We went to Facebook and they said, oh no, that's nothing, because they were relying on American information, and that's not a term known in America. So we had to explain to them, no, you need to understand this is like Uncle Tom in America,
right?
And they were like, oh right, okay, then yeah, okay, we'll take it down then, So we had these conversations. Sadly, all that's gone and went quite quickly. But when we implemented all those processes, we were able to go and have conversations with MPs where they may not like the answer, but at least they knew what the answer was.
So Phil, some of the MPs we mentioned in part one, they're having more than 700 death and rape threats. What are they? Are you just saying that this is a way of life? They've just got to put up with it?
Well, to some degree, it's a reality of life. It's not a way of life. I don't think they should have to put up with it for a start. I think I would probably challenge some of those figures, if I'm blunt, because that's not what we were seeing.
Really?
There were 2 or 3 that were getting a huge volume of abuse, but that wasn't the same across all Parliament.
So, are you suggesting that some politicians are over-egging how many threats they're getting?
I can only speak from my experience, and my experience was that we had a lot of MPs who were being deceitful around crimes that had not happened.
But that's a criminal offence, isn't it?
It is a criminal offence, yeah.
So did you go after the MPs?
No, good Lord, no.
Why not?
Because we weren't allowed to. That wouldn't be the done
Not
thing.
allowed.
In that. Well, you have to think about it in the context. In that context where we are in there to protect them, if we start going after MPs, after Jo Cox, etc., it's there are different ways of doing things, and so I don't think necessarily. And in my day of policing, in our day of policing, just because someone commits a criminal offence, you don't necessarily go after them for the jugular. There are other ways of resolving problems.
Sounds
Something
like a bit of
called police
cap-doffing to
discretion.
me. Bit of cap-doffing now.
I think it would be reported as cap-doffing.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing it would have been reported as is some sensitivity to the fact that the reason they were doing it, and I had these conversations with Parliamentary Security as well, is they were quite tight with the budget. They didn't want to give a lot of protection to a lot of MPs. They were asking for things that Parliament wasn't willing to fund, particularly, for instance, CCTV at people's premises. If you think they've got 650 MPs, they've all got 2 homes. They've got one in their constituency, and they've got some kind of premises in London. The costs were astronomical, and if MPs felt, Phil has described, some of them were incredibly paranoid. They were living in fear, and whether that fear was a reality or not, their perception was, is it safe for me to leave the building? That's a pretty powerful comment. If they're feeling like that and they don't think they're getting the protection they deserve, they're going to exaggerate the threat to them and their officers. And I think you would have seen quite a lot of that. I strongly suspect we're both retired now, but you're seeing a bit of that now, because people are genuinely, I think they are genuinely terrified.
But there is a flip side in that, without going into the details of what protective security they got, we would have an annual review where the experts were brought in from NACSO and various other departments around
National Counter-Terrorism Security Office.
So we would have expertise every year. So IPSO are the funding wing, if you like, of Parliament. And they would pay for anything that we asked for, as long as it was approved by this system. And the purpose of the security was to prevent an attack. And CCTV has very limited, if any, preventative value in those scenarios.
After this event, right?
So IPSO were never going to pay for something that wasn't actually going to stop an attack. They weren't paying for investigative tools. They were paying for protective security. And so the problem we were having was that there were people within Parliament who would be quite vocal in what they thought and what they thought they knew without really having the knowledge. And what we were doing was following the guidance and the advice from experts around, okay, so what actually does stop an attack?
Yeah.
And we have to be mindful that what we're actually talking about is stop an attack until such point as the police can get there.
Yeah.
We're not saying we're building fortresses. We're building places that will resist 20 minutes worth of violence before we hopefully can get, because you have to think about, it's easy in the Met, we'll be there in 2 minutes, but in rural parts of the country, different ballgame. So that was the model, and it wasn't that it was too expensive. It didn't have the effect that we wanted it to have. And that's where the kind of disagreements were happening, were because we were relying upon expertise, and there were other people who thought they knew more than they did.
Got me into terrible trouble, you did, with the Speaker of the House.
Yes, well,
because there were plenty of finger pointing at Basu to say, just give them, I'm getting too much aggravation now, so can you just say that it's good to have this? And I said, well, no, I'm not going to say that, because the expertise is this isn't going to help you. It isn't going to protect you. So if you want to pay that, there are better ways to spend your money, in other words. But it got to the point where they just wanted a quiet life.
But I would also counter that by saying is that, when I first went into Parliament, Operation Bridger, which is the that was in place well before Jo Cox was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
and
it just expanded
almost nobody took it up.
No,
even when I was there, at some point, even after 12, 18 months in, only about 30% of MPs had actually taken up their security quota.
Yeah.
So whenever there was an incident in the news, we'd have a flurry of phone calls to say, I need to get my security in place and all that, And we'd be actively pushing, so we'd be getting the list of all the MPs who hadn't had it. And some didn't have it because there were all sorts of reasons. Some were living in stately homes and they didn't want to upset their properties with crude security elements. Some thought, I don't deserve to have it because my constituents don't get it. So why should I have it? So there was a whole range of reasons why people chose not to have it. Others were trying to get more than they were allowed. Can I have it at my mum and dad's address because I go there at weekends? No, you can't, because this is taxpayers' money. So I would hope that 100% of MPs have it now, but I don't think I could guarantee that.
As much as you can tell me, just explain what goes into the actual protection operation for a high-profile politician or a high-profile individual.
Well, it's a really interesting question, and I think, again, we need to look at the research and look at, if you looked at all the MPs that have been attacked and killed, none of them were high-profile.
No.
None of them were outspoken, were anybody that you would put on a high-profile list or a risk list. So the research that I did when I was there in the dissertation looked at the attack on politicians. And if we exclude Ann Widdecombe most recently, A, because we don't know what's happened because that's still subject to the investigation, and B, because it sits outside. The consistent pattern was that MPs were being attacked or targeted by local constituents. Why? Well, because they got access to you. 2 or 3 of the MPs, their attackers, looked at a range of different MPs that they were going to attack, but then zoned in on their own MP. Because they could make an appointment to come and see you, which is what often used to happen.
Yeah.
And then attack you by circumventing whatever security you had in place. So why were they attacked? Well, they're attacked because they are a symbol of the state. And it didn't matter what your political position was. You were a representation of the state, and therefore I'm attacking you. And so, the idea, and I saw a couple of years ago, we've created a list of high-profile MPs. I think that's a waste of time.
Yeah, what you've just said, effectively, every single MP
is it equal risk
because they are a representation of the state.
Yeah, now there are government ministers.
That's even more terrifying then.
Well, yes, but there are government ministers that clearly sit above that, and they get the full armed package. This is why the argument is to all MPs, you should all be taking up the security package, and you should all be following the guidance and advice of how to run your surgery, etc. Because we cannot predict who's going to be next. It's a nonsense to say because you're really controversial, you're going to be next.
I'd like to ask you about the private security world, which you now operate in. We know that the Met Police, obviously, they do protect high-profile politicians, such as the Prime Minister, Home Secretary, what have you. But there are other politicians who are not high-profile ministers that will receive protection because a threat is deemed credible. Explain how this works, because I'm of the understanding that this actually gets farmed out to private security firms. I do know that Andy Burnham, in the weeks before he became Prime Minister, he had a private security firm looking after him, and then as soon as he stepped into number 10, all of a sudden he gets the Met top protection. How do those relationships work, and is it And who pays for it?
Well, what I would say is, certainly when I was there, if you were a MP that was under threat, and we can use Rosie Cooper as an example because she was one that we were able to stop, she got police protection. If there is a live threat against your life, you will get police protection, whoever you are, pretty much. I'm surprised to hear that Andy Burnham had private security, because I would expect GMP probably to have stepped in and looked after that role. I can tell you, they're not very good if they do, because I can tell you I looked, and it was appeared in a publication that was out recently. After he was elected, I found his home address in under 5 minutes. So that's part of the problem, right? So, but
it's not meant to happen, is it?
No. But to answer your question, if we're looking at various politicians who are in the news all the time who've got private security, they're very often they're getting private security because the state, if you like, or the government has made an assessment and said you don't need it, and they don't like the fact that what they're being told is going against what they feel, partly because they are feeling terrified because of the levels of abuse and threats they're getting, and because very few people are able or qualified or willing to tell them, we've assessed the threat against you and there is no genuine physical threat against you.
How do they take that?
Well, it depends who they are, doesn't it? I mean, some of them are driven by their own ego, and therefore it's very difficult. I mean, I can remember one particular MP.
Badly is the short answer.
But I can remember one MP who said to me, I was explaining him, and he said to me, I can't believe you're taking all this intelligence as taking notes of all this intelligence. It's utter rubbish. You need to ignore all the intelligence. Now, I happen to know he was an army officer, and he'd served in Afghanistan. So I said, so let me get this clear. When you were an army officer out in Afghanistan and you're going on patrol, and the incel said, can you come in for a briefing? You were telling them, no, we're just going to go out and have a wild wander around Afghanistan. We don't need any of your intelligence because it's nonsense. We're just going to wander around. I said, well, of course not. I said, well, why do you think it's any different for us then?
Yeah.
Do you not think if we had intelligence that there is a threat against your life, do you not think we would act immediately and put protection around you? There's no one in this country, we can talk about Prince Harry. If there is a threat against that person's life and we've got evidence to suggest that, you will get armed protection. And someone like Neil would authorise it immediately. So we then get all these people who for whatever reason, and it's because people think having a bodyguard is sexy. It's not. It's claustrophobic if it's done properly. And I can tell you a lot of it isn't done properly.
Right.
In the private sector.
A lot of MPs, when they eventually get close protection packages, are disappointed is not the right word, but they realise that it's changed their life forever and not for the good.
No. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And you've, I occasionally have used, I very rarely use close protection for my clients because certainly not the ones in the UK. The ones in the US is a different story, but in the UK, in fact, I can say at the moment, none of our clients have close protection.
How would you summarise your clients?
Our clients are predominantly self-made billionaires who are varying in risk, but at one end, high risk because they're high profile because of various other elements that cause them to be high risk.
So in reality, are they more at threat than politicians? These
arguably, yes. Yeah, arguably, yes. And some of the risk factors around that are. But you see, what you have to understand is if you're looking at a targeted attack, which is what we're talking about. So you've got two types. You've got targeted attack and you've got the kind of random attack in the street, the kind of harassment in the street. Now, you might argue that the personal security works quite well in that environment. Right. Because they're going to be able to create some distance between you and this angry person and shuttle you off to somewhere that you're safe. That doesn't happen with a targeted attack. You can look back at a number of state officials who've had heavily armed protection and have been killed. You can look at Ronald Reagan, who had, at the time, probably the most heavily armed team around him.
Right.
But a fixated person shot 5 rounds, killed one person, and the protection team never fired a round back because they simply couldn't. So you need to look at, okay, we've got this situation where we've got targeted attacks, and part of my kind of specialism is around protecting against targeted violence. And so if you reverse engineer what targeted violence is, targeted violence requires predictability. I need to know where you're going to be at any specific time and place.
Right.
I'm not going to hang around waiting outside your house because I'll get spotted. I'm not going to hang around your offices because someone will notice me. I need to know you're going to be at a certain place at a certain time and I'm going to attack you at that point. So they require predictability. Predictability comes from information. So if we can prevent that information being readily available, it makes it very difficult to target that person. So with our clients, that's one of the things we do. We make it very difficult to find anything about them. Now that's not genuine information because they're public figures.
Right.
They've got stuff out in the social media and the media. They're busy people. They're being reported on. But that's different from what we call personal identifiable information.
Okay.
Can I find where you live? Can I find where your kids go to school? Can I find where you hang around? All those sorts. If I can't find that, it's very difficult to target you.
Right. And just final question, Phil. Is the current system for the security of MPs fit for purpose?
If it's based on what I was experiencing when I was there still, and it's changed, and it's been a number of years, so it might have changed, yes, I think it is. But it requires the MPs to take some responsibility as well. It requires them to follow the guidance and advice. It requires them to have their security fixed. It requires a number of people to, frankly, keep their mouth shut because they don't know what they're talking about. But it also requires...
He's not talking about armchair detectives or investigators.
Tell us what you really think, Phil.
Well, yeah. But it also requires policing and parliamentary security to educate themselves around what really is a threat and consistently make sure that messaging is getting through, because they're two separate things. And what we don't want to do is put all of our assets, as in time and money, into noise. We need to be focused on where their actual threat is.
Phil, thanks so much for coming in.
Cheers, Phil.
Pleasure.
What did you think, Andy? I was watching your face throughout that, thinking, this is a surprise to you. You did. I've obviously read Phil's dissertation, so I sort of knew where he would be coming from. And what he said was not always well received in Parliament.
Well, I can see why.
For obvious reasons.
I mean, just the things. I mean, there's so many things that stood out, but I think the main one was the fact that a lot of these MPs are embellishing the truth.
Well, I saw you go. But I think I've tried to be a little more forgiving about why people might be doing that, because I've seen the sheer terror on
Be more, Phil.
And Phil will have also seen some of the terrifying. If you think about the number of female MPs, black and Asian MPs, which have grown dramatically in the last 30 years, these are the people receiving most of that keyboard warrior stuff.
Yeah.
And the way it's changing their perception of the job they do and what they're doing is not good for our democracy. And they are very, very scared. And it's how to ameliorate that fear by telling them what the real risk is. And listening to Phil, I hope they all tune into this and understand that there might be a different way of looking at the problem.
Will it come as a comfort to them? I don't know.
Well, it ought to in some respects. Partly come as a comfort because Phil is trying to explain what the real threat and the real potential risk and where that risk might crystallise, which enables you to do something about it. And I think in terms of personal protection, most people's fear, if you give them practical steps to take where they can secure their own protection, they start to feel much more confident about their life. Yeah. I know this. I was the head of counter-terrorism. I received protection. I understand that of the vast majority of that receiving protection, to a limited extent, is my responsibility to do the things I am told, and to accept the advice that I'm given. And I think if more MPs came forward and did that, and some of them, I mean, David Amess, God bless him, he's famous. After Jo Cox's murder, the irony is he was one of the MPs who said, this isn't right. You shouldn't be protecting me more than you're protecting the public. You shouldn't separate me from my constituents because my constituents matter, and he was famous for being a brilliant MP in that respect. But it is tragic. But listen to what Phil said. If you're an MP listening to this, take up Operation Bridger, take up what Parliamentary Security are offering you.
I think you
and basically learn how to protect yourself.
I think you might put a few noses out of joint there, but that's what we like.
Well, he did when he was serving, but that's why we liked him.
I can tell that. Right, let's leave it there, Neil. Thanks for watching or listening to this episode of The Crime Agents. Make sure you've subscribed to us on Global Play, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And we'll be back with a Q&A episode on Thursday and another main episode next Monday. Until then, goodbye.
And goodbye from me.
This has been a global production.